I'm looking at you with your sunglasses.
Yeah, like I'm just what were we on?
Where?
So I just have my sunglasses on so this crowd at home can see how bright it is in here. They actually try to imitate the beach in the studio. We're just missing a little bit of sand, maybe some little music, tiki-tiki in the back, and little poolside service. But since we're live, welcome everyone. This is the Power Hour not with Bob Powers today. Bob is out on a much, much well-deserved and needed vacation. So he's left, as they say, when the cat is out, the mice will play. He's left some of his favorite guests to take over the show. We're going to be doing this for the next few weeks. I'm Eleazar Melendez. I'm a political consultant on the Democratic side of the Democratic persuasion. This is my good friend, Hector Ruz. Hector.
Yes, hi. I'm also on the political consulting. I'm been told that I have to do this live stream as well, which hasn't come up yet on. Now it has. And let's see how I can join this. Hector Ruz has joined. So there's the button. So I also have a history of politics in Miami. And if you're looking for me on social media, I'm here at Hector in Miami.
And we're still setting up.
Yep.
So you're getting the full behind the scenes experience here.
Yes, including some people using some interesting language behind the scenes. So let me see. Actually, that didn't work at all. Technology, right? So it's going to be an interesting show because I think our discussion is going to include things about, and we're going to wait till people get in before we really start going into this. We're after Biden's first 100 days in office, and now everything people are talking about. I guess almost to a certain extent feel like they're looking for excuses not to do the agenda that Democrats were given a mandate, as far as I'm concerned, about getting control of basically the legislative process in government, and we're waiting to see what they'll be able to pass.
Right. So there's some interesting things going on. It has been 100 days, a little bit over 100 days. And as we all know, the Biden administration and the Democratic Congress took a country that was in shambles. We had an unemployment rate that was a thing of shame. We had an economy that was in the toilet after mismanagement of a pandemic. And we had thousands and thousands of people dying every day because of this uncontrolled pandemic that the prior administration never took seriously. And the Biden administration has come in. They've far exceeded their goals in terms of vaccination early and significantly. The vaccine was there and was produced thanks to Operation Warp Speed. So, we got to give credit to where credit's due. That's something that the prior administration did. But then they left the larder empty in terms of distribution, and they really had to set up with that. And they have done that successfully. And that's what's been able to then assist the economy moving forward. And we're seeing it right now. The employment situation is such that for the first time in, I think, 40 or 50 weeks, the unemployment claims went down last week. Mm-hmm. And I believe that was nationally as well as in the state of Florida. While at the same time, there's a significant upward pressure in wages, which shows that people who are going back to work are deciding that they want to be paid properly. And we see a situation that obviously is going to be better for working people if the wages are up and there's more jobs. And that's just from the baseline of coming back from a really, really deep hole that we were in. And it's not glamorous, and it's not something that necessarily you get to say, well, I promised this and then I did this. But the reality is the last two Democratic administrations have come in with the country on fire. Obama came in under the worst recession since the Great Depression, and the banking system that was collapsing around him, and had to turn that around with Biden as vice president. Biden now comes into the situation. For me, it's more of an issue of, all right, the 100 days are up. The honeymoon phase is up as far as you're concerned in terms of where the party is and what support you're getting. So how do you pivot to the many, many, many promises that you've made? And yes, there's stuff in immigration in particular where I would say that probably no one's happy with what's happening right now. There is personally, I feel like there are a lot of promises made to Puerto Rico and the Puerto Ricans that it's not that they're not going to be fulfilled, but they haven't been fully fulfilled in the first 100 days. So I'm definitely looking out for that, and I think we'll keep advocating for that to happen. It's not too late. It's the beginning of the administration, but yeah, things need to start happening.
So in many ways, this is we have a lot of there's a great comparison to when Obama came into office. President Obama came to office, and he had control of both chambers as well of Congress.
Yes,
and and of course they were able to pass one signature bill, the Affordable Care Act.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever you want to debate about it, they actually passed it. And
right.
So the discussion today is part of, there is still outside the 100 days now. He sets the agenda and he moves, and Congress then implements it. And we're talking about, yesterday was the 1 year anniversary of the death of George Floyd. And, so part of the conversation that's happening in Congress is about qualified immunity, and we'll get to that.
Yeah.
And, obviously we're talking, the other two signature issues is again, we're still talking about the COVID-19. So, and of course now the recovery, which is this large infrastructure stimulus package has been discussed for months at this point, even at the onset of the administration. And then of course you have some things in regards to what that means in terms of politics coming down the line. So there is a lot of uncertainty in terms of going into the next midterm elections that, like the Obama administration, went into a midterm and then suddenly lost both houses, at least lost total control of
they definitely went back.
But unfortunately,
call it a shellacking. If
we'll get into it. I think the point is that there is the political uncertainty is, we're going to go through this again. But the problem is this time is that everyone's seen that you can either be an obstructionist or and really not disable, right, the ability of meaningful reform, like qualified immunity. I think something that was done administratively, last week was TPS for Haitians,
correct. Which was a campaign promise,
which was a campaign promise, but again, it was set for 18 months. So meaning it's going to be a midterm issue,
right?
Again, so to actually implement something more comprehensive by Congress, and of course to extend that. St. Vincent had a volcanic once every 50-year volcanic eruption, and they weren't given TPS immediately. So there's a lot of conversations that what this goes into, and it affects a lot of people in South Florida because unfortunately we get everybody from the Caribbean and Latin America, whenever some disaster strikes. So we are affected by these things, and frankly, I think it was important for the TPS for Haitians because it includes a work authorization. So that really brings a lot of people back into the workforce that we can relatively count on, because that's really the conversation. We don't want to have people working under the table and then they're not in open competition, or they're not really out in the open, and then there are all sorts of social ramifications for that. But we can go from there.
I think the expectation is, let's start with this. There's a little bit of a difference between when Obama came in with a significant majority of both houses and the presidency. Obama came in with 60 seats, right? And he held them for almost 2 years up until they lost that crazy race in Massachusetts with a guy that drove a pickup truck. If people can remember, what was his name? Scott Brown, was it?
I just remember he had a layout spread in a adult magazine.
Right. He was the one-term senator with a pickup truck that screwed it up for the Democrats on that thing because they lost Massachusetts out of all places, one of the bluest states, right? So, he came in with 60 seats, though, and that allowed the Affordable Care Act to pass and other significant legislation, right? Like Obama's first 2 years were chock full of legislation in terms of protection of women, protection of redlining issues and banking issues and so on and so forth, right? As soon as they lost that, and for the Affordable Care Act, they actually had to wheel and deal within their own party. If you remember, the original Affordable Care Act was a lot better in the opinion of one analyst because it included a public option. That was taken out because Joe Lieberman decided to tank it for the benefit of the Connecticut insurance industry, right?
Sure.
So they had to do a lot of wheeling and dealing, even within the party, to get 60 votes. When they lose that, it goes into what you're talking about is the obstructionist vote. Now, I think the difference between Obama and Biden is that we saw that movie already.
Right.
I think Obama naively tried for 2 years, after he lost the Senate up until he was reelected, to basically push to try to do some performative bipartisanship, and show that he was trying. And then when he won the election, the re-election, said, well, the fever probably broke. Let me try to keep working with Republicans. And it wasn't until his last, the third year of his second term, that he basically said, these guys don't get it. I'm just going to have to do things by executive order and expand a lot of the imperial presidency, as has been done on both sides,
right?
And push forward. I think Biden saw that. He lived through that. So he knows, all right, these guys have no incentive to actually help us. Now, the question is going to be, since they have 50 seats, that allows them to do certain things that are budget issues, but it doesn't allow them to do a lot of things that they want to do that are popular, that people want, that they have a mandate for,
right?
But that require 60 votes because of this arcane structure of the Senate. For example, the $15 minimum wage. This is something that's a campaign promise. It polls very high. It's a very popular issue. Most Americans, overwhelming majorities of Democrats want it. Overwhelming majorities of independents want it, and majorities of Republicans want it. And
it passed in Florida.
And it passed in Florida on a constitutional amendment, right?
That's right.
So this is a popular item, but you need all 50 Democrats plus 10 Republicans because of the ruling that it's an issue that takes 60 votes. So there needs to be filibuster reform in order to move that forward. There are 2 Democratic senators that are holding it back, Joe Manchin in West Virginia and Kyrsten Sinema in Arizona. Joe Manchin, a little bit more understandably, he is from the reddest of the reddest states and is basically a political survivor. And the second he retires, the Democrats are going to lose that seat. So they have a lot of patience for him and trying to understand what he's doing. Kyrsten Sinema, not really. I mean, she's just trying to be a centrist for centrist sakes and to say, I go on all sides and whatnot. I mean, she's an interesting politician. She started as a Green Party candidate, extreme left Democrat, and to move to the right of Chuck Schumer and and most of the Democratic coalition is interesting.
It's true. One thing I'll just chime in and say is that the Progressive Caucus has been rather silent on trying to block anything or even make a stand on any of the particular issues. There was some noise last month, but that's also because the reality is that the control of the Democratic control in the House of Representatives, the lower house, actually is somewhat as tenuous.
Well, except for filibuster reform.
Right.
So that goes back to they understand that it's a chess game, and the move that you need in order to unblock everything else is to block, take out this 10-vote wall. So that is going to be where the fight is, and that's kind of the game. Without that, a lot of these things that are popular and people want cannot get them.
Right. So at this point, we have 2 senators who are holding things up in the Senate. So does that mean that every
52?
52.
So 2 on the Democratic side and all 50 on the Republican side.
Right. Yeah. So the question becomes then, what are we talking about? And will the administration be able to say they actually pass something into the next midterm?
I believe so. For example, I believe that this infrastructure deal is something that they've been thinking about for a long time on both sides, actually.
Right.
And if you think about it, infrastructure, they say that it's bipartisan. It's really nonpartisan because at the end of the day, a lot of the people that are pushing this are large business interests that are going to make a lot of money.
Sure.
Because we need to fix the roads. And we need to fix the highways. We need to fix the trains. We need to provide proper infrastructure for wireless communications, especially after a year where we all had to go wireless, right?
Right.
And everyone knows that, and it's extremely popular. And on top of that, people are going to make a lot of money doing that.
Sure.
So there's a lot of interest and push to do that, right? On both the regular people asking for it and quote unquote the special interests asking for it, right? So that's the kind of thing that I think. Yeah, there's going to be positioning and saying, no, you're spending too much or you're spending on the wrong thing. But at the end of the day, I don't think that they can just stand in the way of that.
Right. So, in terms of the infrastructure bill,
Sure.
This is the rescue plan, right?
They're calling it the rescue plan. I've actually had a discussion with someone in DC, like that works not in Congress, not in the administration, about this, as to whether it should be so directly tied to the rescue, because the reality is that this is stuff that Trump promised. This is stuff that has been overdue for 4 years.
Right.
That, Trump said that he was going to do a bipartisan infrastructure bill like the first week, and we had infrastructure week every week of the term, right? It became a running joke in Washington, like it's Wednesday of infrastructure week, right?
Right.
And it's stuff that we need. It's not stuff that we're coming up with. It's stuff that's there. Yeah, I mean, the way that it's arranged obviously has to do with coming back, using it as a tool to come back from the crisis, and that's important. And a lot of the stuff there takes into account how we lived in the past year, and understanding that, yes, physical, quote unquote, hard engineering-based infrastructure is important, but also communications infrastructure and care infrastructure in order to move forward.
So I think it's one of the other things that has some bipartisan support is this issue of a law repealing qualified immunity.
Yeah.
So it does have bipartisan support in both chambers, but we're still it's passed the House at least a month ago. So what is it really the cloture issue? The 60 votes in the Senate that we're waiting on there too.
So I think we should talk a little bit about what qualified immunity is for the benefit of our viewers. So it's very interesting. It comes from this concept of sovereign immunity, which goes back to basically the king of England, right?
Right.
And the idea that if you were the king, your courts, you couldn't be sued in your own courts for your actions, and your ministers couldn't be sued in your own courts for the actions that they took on your behalf. So it goes back hundreds and hundreds of years to reach out to this concept. It's interesting because we gave up kings and princes in this country, but we didn't give up everything that is associated to them. So over the years, the courts have said that in cases where you're suing the government or government agents, you are limited to being able to recover damages from them for certain actions
directly and individually,
from and from the government interest, right? So basically, what the Supreme Court and what the courts have decided, there's nothing written down in a law, or it's not a constitutional precept that says that this is how it's got to be, but they've interpreted it going back to English common law and the rights of kings, that if you're a government agent, if you're a person that works for a government, and you're acting in your capacity because you were given a job to do by the government, and what you did is not something that is wildly outside of the scope of your work, a crazy abuse of your authority, right? And what you did is something that you could argue you were mandated to do, you cannot be held liable for the damages and the hurt and pain that you caused, right? So what this means is that in practice, when you're a police officer, if you go out and you get drunk and shoot off your gun in the middle of the street, of course, they're going to sue you for that. They're probably going to prosecute you for that. You're going to get no immunity for that because that's acting recklessly, right? Now, if you're a police officer in a raid and there's a suspect and you shoot off your gun in a crazy way that really you shouldn't have done, and you hurt like 5 people, you're going to be able to say, well, I was doing my job, so I shouldn't really have to be accountable for that. And the government's going to back you up, and the courts are going to say, yeah, because of qualified immunity, the people that were shot or hurt or property damage can't recover, right? And that's a problem. I mean, it's the only industry where people have life and death power that you cannot get sued and use the courts as a system of regulation to take back, and make people whole for damages that are caused.
In other words, the least accountable industry in America. Prison, law enforcement and private prisons.
Lately, I thought that judges are pretty much up there too. But I would say that it definitely creates bad incentives.
Sure.
I don't think that police officers are bad people. I think they're some of the best people that serve our community. and most of them, including many that I know, really want to go out there and be of service and are of service, right? And I don't think that they go out there saying, I'm going to hurt people and get away with it.
Right.
Not at all. Now, I think that if you are not forced to contend with the fact that you're going to be accountable for your actions, and even worse, that when you do something, they do everything not to cover. The system is designed not to let you be accountable for your actions. And guess what? You're not going to be accountable for your actions.
Right.
It's just human nature. And I think, let's take an example of the city of Miami. We have situations where cops here consistently abuse power, consistently abuse people, and act in ways that are problematic and just like really, wouldn't be accepted in any other scenario.
Well, unfortunately, it's something common in all local government police departments.
Right, but there's always like people know the cops know who the cops that act that way are. Right.
Sure.
It's not like, like it just happened. No. The cops will tell you, yeah, that guy.
Arguably, they know where all crime is actually being being committed to, and they just don't.
And it's just like,
but they have a choice to look the other way too.
Well, there is no the system is telling you that you're not accountable. Why would you you say that you are if you're not? So, going back to what happened with the protest that happened this past year with the aftermath of the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and all the people that have been murdered in this country by police officers, there was a move to say, look, this stuff needs to change. First of all, it's never in the Constitution. We should stand to say this is not a thing. And when police officers strongly abuse people, they should be accountable. And cities should not jump to protect them because, they should be accountable too. When it got to that passed in the House, it got to the Senate. There seems to be a compromise version in the Senate led by the senator from South Carolina, whose name escapes me at the moment. Tim Scott.
Tim Scott.
Yeah. Who said, okay, you cannot sue the officers, but you can sue the cities.
Yeah, the departments.
You know what?
Right.
I'm fine with it.
Yeah.
I think that would work because if the city of Miami now had to respond to the possibility that the actions of bad police officers are going to cost them $15, $20, $30, $40 million every time they seriously hurt someone.
Yep.
Guess what? They're going to negotiate police contracts.
Well, I mean, first of all, the insurance rates are going to go up, automatically, because not all of them are self-insured. They're actually there is an insurance out there that does cover them.
The city of Miami is self-insured, though. Yes, it is self-insured.
It's now.
It is. Yeah. Wow. So they would have to think about it, and what they do, they would negotiate contracts that say, look, if you act this and this and this way, you're on your own, buddy.
Right. So in other words, the city has a self-insurance policy of over $30 million a year to cover their liabilities.
The city self-insured for everything, which is an interesting financial tactic. But
right. But it goes with saying. I mean, I do want to say that there are two things that take away from this conversation for everybody listening, and the first thing is that qualified immunity isn't just an issue for Congress, although it is important because then it can basically reverse the point immediately. Correct. Of the Supreme Court decision, that happened in the 60s, I believe, 50s or 60s.
Yeah, it's a doctrine created by.
I think it was 1957. Now I think about it. But the point being is that the reason why we're talking about the city of Miami is because there are a lot of large cities who are enacting their own laws where they are stripping qualified immunity from their own police departments. So in other words, the same conversation, they want to see it accountable. So the whole conversation regarding defund the police really is, well, let's make them more accountable, and in other words, and less obviously, let's just say shoot first, ask questions later, and that's a horrible thing to say, but I mean the case of Breonna Taylor is another case where there is a success as well, because what ended up happening is in part, not in total, but we're getting it's getting there. So Breonna Taylor, for those who may not recall. She was, I believe, an Army veteran that was, had already served her time. She was at home, and there was a no-knock raid to her home, where they were trying to serve somebody else that was not there. They did not announce themselves. It actually got into essentially a gunfight with her boyfriend that was living there, and did everybody die? I know a dog. She did.
She did. The neighbors, both neighbors, his house on both sides were shot up. One of them wasn't there. One of them was. Her boyfriend was subdued, but I believe he took a flashbang.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so they
sure.
You know, they came in like an army.
They didn't
movie,
announce themselves, and that's the issue with no knock raids. But so the Supreme Court actually this past week had basically started saying no. There is a fourth. There is a the Bill of Rights, the Fourth Amendment, really does extend to starting to limit the power of no-knock raids, and a lot of cities and a lot of states are introducing, basic Breonna Taylor acts, where they're removing or prohibiting no-knock raids. Period. Because if you want to serve a warrant on somebody, you serve it, right? You don't try and this idea of using is basically essentially you're sending a SWAT team to serve a search warrant, right? Or there's really no point of that. And if this was white collar crime that's really talking about, which it's not,
right?
They are, or I'm sorry, blue collar crime. That's the word. No, it's white collar crime. Right? White collar crime is like financial crimes, right? They get a chance to talk to their attorney, and they turn themselves in, and there is in other words a system for them and a system for everybody else, and that's really what all this comes down to, and I want people to remember that's really what we're talking about. So all the reasons why we even talk about politics is because we have people who are granting themselves through politics certain privileges over the rest of us,
right? And
in some cases privatizing or the powers of government for their own use, private benefit even.
I mean, you got to understand too, policing did not always look this way.
No. And
policing has evolved a lot. It's only a practice that has really about 150 years, right? It's a post-industrial practice. So like it really cities and even like 50 years ago, it was different because cities were not multicultural. If you were Jewish, you stayed in the Jewish part of town. If you were, Black, you stayed in the Black part of town. Hispanic, like you didn't. Right. So like there was like more of a community like self sufficiency and self protection element, and the police, they were only called in like extraordinary situations and so on and so forth. It's not always good. I mean, domestic violence, for example, was something that was widely underreported because it was considered like an internal thing, right? Until fairly recent in our modern history, right? So there are some things that having the police there and having the police be more active helps with, but the way that policing occurs, where you see this view that the police should be everywhere looking at everything in order to basically catch people in the case that they're committing a crime. That's just not the way that policing has ever worked over the past 20 or 30 years. And then put on top of that, the fact that you have all these military companies.
Actually, as Pippa would say, right? It feels like East Germany.
Right.
Right. That's literally what you just told me.
The on top of that, you have all these military companies that have surplus from the Cold War that basically dumped onto police departments after the 90s, and they had to sell it. So they had to sell their tanks, their Humvees, their high-powered rifles. So they created this mentality that you had to have this warrior cop, armed to the teeth and armored and going in like armor plate SUVs in case that there's a terrorist in the corner. Like, I mean, sometimes you look at these YouTube videos and it's like, Leoville, Tennessee, and they have like 3 armored ATVs and the cops going out there like it's the LAPD SWAT team, and you're like, that's your usual friendly neighborhood cop in America now? That's not right.
Well, there's a lot of issues in terms of criminal justice reform that have been getting some strong looks from Congress. I haven't seen too much of it really come down. There's been some administrative changes, for example, but of course this was actually last year, regarding asset forfeiture. So basically, a lot of local departments started getting less revenue if they participated in federal investigations in regards to asset forfeiture, because the feds have their own asset forfeiture. So that's the IRS, right? So the point is and this is what I like to tell people: we're fighting back, or generally the American people are fighting back to go back to something called the consent society. If you want to knock on my door, I'll decide I'm going to let you in. You're not going to bust it down.
Mm-hmm.
I want, we want a more peaceful society, not a more, in other words, aggressive interventionist in every aspect of our lives, sort of government. So, and that's really just a consent society. So, and I think we're seeing this debate happening even now. Although for example, we're seeing COVID numbers, right? We're seeing in terms of vaccinations, we're seeing people. We've looks like we're hitting about a plateau. About 36% of adult of Americans.
I think 50% of Americans have taken at least one vaccine, and it's in the high 30s for two.
Right.
For the second dose.
In other words, for fully vaccinated.
Cycle, yeah.
Fully vaccinated, right?
Yeah.
So that's, and in some communities though, it's still in the mid-teens.
Yeah.
So it is reflective. Sometimes people are. It is a question. There's this question out there, and it's actually all in terms. The same people who are asking us to vaccinate are the same people who are, and I'm not anti-vaccine, but
mm-hmm.
there's the same people who are but are asking for are the same people who are also asking to obviously reduce the powers of police or make it more accountable and so forth. So it's a broader conversation, and it leads me to the question that in 2 years, in less than 18 months, we're going to start looking at primaries or the August midterms, or the midterms in general. And the Democratic Party has an issue here. And we're talking about them because they're in control of the White House and Congress. And we're getting questions about.
Yeah, we got a nice comment from Dennis Miss is it Missy Goy?
Yeah, Missy Goy. So anyway, it's true. It's taxpayers are on the hook. It's not. These are public
So going
funds.
back to the discussion on qualified immunity, we should have pointed out. We talked about the city paying. No, it's you and me. It's taxpayers that are ultimately paying for that.
Absolutely. When I say the insurance rates, or in this case, now we're telling me they're self-insured, but there are a lot of cities that are self-insured.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, it's the cost to the taxpayer of keeping the status quo. And frankly, we've reached a point where the status quo is unacceptable in a lot of areas of government. So this has become an issue of that there is a new class of progressive agenda out there, even a libertarian agenda out there, that is demanding certain rights back. That it wasn't just that we went through a year of hey, we're waiting for this pandemic to pass, and now we want to go back to normal. It's like we've had a lot of issues before that too. So and this is a time now where the next 2 years. Where we talked at the beginning of the program that we had, what are the people who are leading this country right now is the Democratic Party. That leadership is now is changing in terms of rank and file, the groups, the individual caucuses that are getting stronger or growing in size. There's going to be a lot of open seats. We've had there's an enormous turnover in the Congressional Black Caucus, for instance. We've had the three oldest members of essentially. The three oldest members of the caucus pass away in the last 18 months, and I'll see Hastings here in Florida, John Lewis in Georgia, and I forget the gentleman from Alabama, I believe it was, Louisiana. Well, either way. So those are the more high profile ones for us. And now, and now Representative Val Demings is going to actually leave her seat next year to go run for U.S. Senate. And remember, Congress is a deliberative body that gives authority or leadership role to those who stick it out and gain seniority.
Especially on the Democratic side.
Especially.
The Republicans modified that in the late 90s, early 2000s, but the Democrats, the older you are, the more seniority you're going to get. That's the way it's always been.
Yes, it's true enough that the people, I should say this every time I go on anywhere, the average age for Democratic leadership is 85, 86?
I don't know the exact average. Sounds a little high, but I wouldn't be surprised if
it's definitely in the 80s.
Yeah.
But then again, I'm not going to, the Republicans do get into this game too, because Chuck Grassley is going to turn 92 and he's still a senator. So and
he's going to run for re-election.
He already announced he's going to run for re-election. That's why I was thinking about it. So so when they got into office, the problems they saw in society look nothing like, and even society itself doesn't even look anything like resemble anything like they when they first ran for office. And they've basically, like you said about Manchin, they've just been around, and some people keep encouraging them to stick around because there's not people don't have this it's uncertainty, right? Political uncertainty.
I think in particular the Congressional Black Caucus has been gerrymandered into a lot of their seats. A lot of, I would say more than half of our African American representatives in Congress come from southern states where they gerrymandered into their seats because of restrictive patterns and voting policies and all that they especially here in Florida, you have like these majority African American seats that have been gerrymandered to be like D plus 92.
Yeah.
Like it's basically like, let's get everything. You see these weird shapes and what that creates is a situation that's uncompetitive, both for the seat as well, both for the seat in general, like it's not going to flip parties ever, but also for the incumbent never to change because there's no real competition of ideas if the voters are already chosen in a specific way, right? Sure. Because of the way that it's done in order to benefit normally white Republicans.
So in other words, every congressional seat that you just described is in 2, 3, sometimes 4 media markets. So if you think about like Al Lawson, he's in Jacksonville, and he picks up a little bit of down the coast because it's a little squiggly line that goes like this down the coast. Elsie Hastings' seat in District 20 went all the way, goes from southern Broward County all the way up to Lake Okeechobee and points
they're
north of Palm
disparate
Beach.
Communities, and they are, and they yes, because there's the media markets. That means the counties are different. That means the cities and the way it's structured is different. That means that it's hard for an incumbent to rise who represents many of those communities, because people normally represent 1 or 2 communities based on their bio, right? But so the incumbent's the only one that can kind of say, well, I've represented everything. And that definitely like favors the incumbent. And not to bash on the incumbents, some of them are good and have done a lot of good things. But it means that when they've been there 20, 30 years and they think, well, I'm the best person for this job, there's no one to challenge them and say, well, are you? And that's not healthy for anyone, not for them, not for the district, not for either party, and certainly not for the people of the United States and the state of Florida or whatever it's happening.
Right. I think part of the warning to take away from this is that there are a lot of people who are not focused on particular issues. In other words, like actual let's pass an agenda, because right now we know, especially to minister to questions. All right, then we know that there was a lot of grandstanding. Sometimes there was a lot of hope that Democrats controlling the Congress and the White House could actually pass a lot of things. But the threat always is that there's always going to be that one guy or girl or lady who's going to make this their hill that they're going to be famous on. You have the Marjorie Taylor Greenes of the world there. And on the other side, you have people who like you said, right? Joe Manchin, who just wants to have this is going to be his legacy,
Then I guess that is where we might want to make the exception that thank God the president's an old man that's been in politics for 35 years and 40 years, because he's seen a lot of this and how to deal with his people. And we saw that on some of these recent crises. And I know we don't have time to discuss it, but we saw it in the way that,
we didn't get to it, but, let alone we're talking about domestic policy because we're all hyper focused on it because it is important. What we're talking about recovering out of the weight and the economic fallout from the pandemic. Right. People are wondering, well, are we going to turn a corner on our foreign policy? There's going to be talks about re-engagement with Iran. This question of the Israel-Palestine issue. And we still haven't resolved this question about we do have I believe he's still a sitting member of the board of Raytheon as the Secretary of Defense.
I'm not sure about it, but I believe you.
Yeah. So I'm just, it's those are questions because obviously politics is a distraction, wag the tail,
Look, and again, there's very little that was run on foreign policy. No one voted because of their foreign policy preference. It's not like when the Iraq War was going on, that was the main thing that people were voting on. So it's kind of okay if they leave it in the back burner. It will cause issues when crises bubble up. Right. And people are asking what's going to happen with Cuba. What's going to happen with Iran? What's going to happen with Israel now? That's come to the forefront.
Wasn't that something, right? We haven't heard the détente or restoration of.
I don't expect that they would touch that with a 10-foot pole for the next year.
At least, right, because of the midterms, and that's a good point to end on too.
But why would they? They didn't campaign. Look, they didn't campaign on it.
There's no political gain.
Right.
They don't get anything out of that.
So
and it boggles the mind right now that I'm not seeing a lot of activity from Democrat challengers to the Republican Congress people in South Florida, and not as much as before. I mean,
I think that they have a target on Mario Almeida. I think we're also waiting to see what the district attorney brings around. That's going to be a big thing.
Well, and with that said, we apparently did not get. Tampa's going to get an extra congressional seat, but not down here then, because of the census numbers.
But they'll move. They'll move stuff around. Right. I'm sure. So
no, it'll affect certainly whole areas. But that's interesting in and of itself. And one thing I did want to mention, I guess on the outside is in terms of the politics, because this conversation really is about everyone starting to look at what 2022 looks like. Because it's important, and we've seen migrations really, people leaving California, New York, especially California now, coming to Florida, particularly South Florida. So if you see a lot of license plates from outside of Florida, they're here to stay. They're definitely here to stay. People are moving with their feet.
We'll see what happens in the next few months about it. I think that Florida Miami in particular has a lot of special things going on. I want to see these people live through their first hurricane and blackout, and see if they're going to stay after that, and their first August as well. Right. But look, this city is the magic city, and it's so because it defies odds and it defies expectations. So I'm not surprised that we're attracting people.
Yep.
So with that, I think we'll say goodbye to our listeners. Thank you for coming into the Power Hour, and join us next week, same time.